when I was finance secretary and Dr. Reddy was the governor, there was a suggestion that the RBI is holding a large size of reserves which are yielding very low returns. It is not, the government should not be tampering with the balance sheet of the central bank lightly, because the balance sheet of the central bank needs to be strong to inspire confidence in the economy. There were two issues in that 2G case. One was the price at which 2G spectrum must be given in 2007-8. The second was the process of selecting licenses, the auction process or the bidding process. The view at that time of the Department of Telecom was that we should give 2G spectrum in 2007-8 at the price discovered in 2001 through an auction. Over the last 4 years, I believe the central government has been very responsible in fiscal management, and the finance minister has reiterated that she'll be able to deliver on that target. We have to see after the election which government comes into office and who becomes the finance minister. But I hope whoever comes into office will adhere to that target.
First of all, why do you call it call the book Just a Mercenary? Is the reason for the title of it?
I considered a few other titles and eventually decided on this one. And the reason is the following. As people living in this country, as citizens of the country, we're all prone to complaining about it. Oh, this country is unfair, unjust, unequal. There's no opportunity for merit, etc. But when I look back on my own career, I find that I've gotten so much from this country. I went to a Sainik school with a government scholarship. I got an IIT education, again with a government scholarship. I could get into the IAS. And eventually I had the privilege of serving as the governor of the Reserve Bank. I find that the country has given me so much. And whatever assignment I was doing, I tried to do it to the best of my ability. But the question that always ran at the back of my mind is, am I doing my best? Am I delivering just because I'm getting paid for it? Or was I driven by a larger cause? A mercenary, as I understand, is someone who just goes to fight a war because he's paid for it. He doesn't have a commitment to any other cause. So my internal quandary was whether I was just behaving like a mercenary or whether I was motivated by a larger calling of giving back to society more than I have received from it. So that's the reason for this title with a question mark, and I'm leaving it to the readers to decide if indeed I was a mercenary or more than that.
Yeah, but your journey has been from IIT to RBI, and now again as a faculty member in the US University. So, sir, you are probably one of the among the long in a list of highest officers who have served as RBI governor. Okay,
right.
Now, do you think bureaucrats make good for RBI governor, or do you think people like Raghuram Rajan or Chief Patel brings anything new to the table?
Well, the RBI over the last 90 years has been served by 25 governors. And they come from different backgrounds. Some are economists, some came from the academia, some are civil servants like Dr. Reddy and me. And I don't think you can find a correlation between the background of the governor and his performance. Every governor, I believe, responds to the macroeconomic situation of his time and delivers results. But I don't believe there is a correlation. So I'm disinclined to correlate between the background of the governor and the performance.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And whenever the governor's position falls vacant, I think the government must draw from the entire available pool and choose the best person, not necessarily driven by a particular background.
Okay. So, sir, there are references in your book about the tension between government and RBI on policy issues. Now, do you think a central bank of a country can function completely free from the government intervention?
Can you please repeat that, Deepak?
So, do you think a central bank of a country can function completely free from any intervention from government?
Well, it should in theory function free of interference, and it should not, even if there is interference, its decisions and actions should not be influenced by that interference. Now, let me explain that nuance that a little bit. The Reserve Bank of India consults all stakeholders in determining its monetary policy. It consults banks, non-bank financial institutions, financial markets, economists, farmers' bodies, microfinance institutions, consults all stakeholders and takes into view their suggestions and their concerns. Similarly, the Reserve Bank also consults the government because the government is a big stakeholder in what the Reserve Bank does. So the Reserve Bank should listen to all stakeholders, including the government, with an open mind, but I believe should act in its best judgment. Now, there is attempts to interfere or attempts to influence or criticize a central bank. That is not unique to India. It's happened in other countries as well. It's happened in Japan, in the UK, in the US, in Brazil, and in Turkey. And it's happening in our country as well. But in countries where institutions are not very mature, these tensions or alleged interference, as you call it, might create some problems, and therefore we have to be careful.
But how do you rate RBI in this? Do you think it's a mature institution? India.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt about it. RBI is a mature institution, and over the last 80 years, it stood for the public interest. Not even the government, of course, has a law stands for a public interest. It's just that they judge differently, and their concerns have horizon differences, have different priorities. But I don't. Both the RBI and government are equally concerned for the longer-term growth and stability of the economy.
Sir, in one section of your book, you have discussed about this threshold between the government and RBI over the use of forex reserves for infrastructure, investment in infrastructure. Yeah. So recently of late, I mean, there has been some criticism of the government for asking the RBI to transfer a large sum of their money from their reserves. So what is your take on this, particularly transferring say 90,000 crore or a lakh crore every year to government? I mean, do you think this is they'll have negative effect of this?
See, use of forex reserves for other purposes, putting pressure on the Reserve Bank for allowing a part of the foreign exchange reserves to be used for infrastructure financing. That issue is quite different from the dividend issue. Okay. I don't think, there should be a conflict. Let's talk about the use of foreign exchange reserves for infrastructure. That came up when I was finance secretary and Dr. Reddy was the governor. Okay. There was a suggestion that the RBI is holding a large size of reserves, which are yielding very low returns. On the other hand, under PPP, our private corporates are borrowing huge amounts of money, foreign capital, at a high rate of interest. So why doesn't the RBI give a part of those reserves to the corporates to build infrastructure? It might be a win-win situation that the RBI will get a higher return, the corporate will get financial support at a lower rate of interest. But there is a hidden cost to it, which is that RBI's reserves are a safety net. And if the country or the economy is seen to be tampering with those reserves or diverting them for other purposes, the credibility of the economy might be eroded. After all, we hold reserves in order to defend defend the economy against exchange rate volatility. If we take away those reserves and use them for other purposes, our defenses, our ability to defend might be eroded. That was the concern at that time. So RBI had reservations. The government wanted to push through that suggestion. So as finance secretary, it was my responsibility to push through that. And we had discussed that in the RBI board, and eventually the decision was to set apart a very small amount. And as I write in the book, and I have written elsewhere too in more detail, it is not, the government should not be tampering with the balance sheet of the central bank lightly, because the balance sheet of the central bank needs to be strong to inspire confidence in the economy. In fact, when countries are in trouble, when governments are fiscally stretched and they go to IMF assistance, IMF actually lends to countries or extends assistance on the strength of the balance sheet of the central bank and on the credibility of the central bank. So I don't think we should be tampering with it lightly unless there's an extraordinary compulsion. That was the forex reserve issue. The dividend issue, I think, is not so much of, I wouldn't call it an infringement on the autonomy of the reserve. You know, under the institutional arrangements, the RBI does make a surplus. The RBI is not a commercial entity. Profit making is not one of its objectives. Regardless, in the very course of its business, RBI makes a surplus. And under law, RBI is allowed to put away a part of the surplus for building reserves, to build stability, and then give the rest to the government as dividend, as surplus profit. The government, because of its own fiscal needs, requests RBI to give more dividend, but the government's grievance is that RBI is fortifying itself with reserves more than necessary. That was the issue that came up in 2018, 2017, 2018. This has always been an issue during my time. It was an issue when I was finance secretary. I was resisting pressure I was putting pressure on the RBI. As governor RBI, I was resisting pressure from the government. It's always been settled with some mutual understanding. But it came out into the open sometime in 2018. But I wouldn't think that this is an issue that concerns this is an issue that can be settled amicably. And if the government asks the RBI to give more, I wouldn't call it putting pressure on the RBI.
Okay. So, sir, one of the issues that as a country we have not been able to resolve amicably is the state versus center question. In your book,
state versus center.
Yeah. Yes. State versus center, fiscal federalism.
Right.
So, sir,
right.
Yeah. So, in fact, in your book, look, you have said that in the interview for your IS exam, there were discussion about center versus state, and so that was in 1960s, if I'm not wrong, right?
1972.
72, yeah. Okay, and today we are say 2024, and those issues remain unresolved. So, what is your take on that? So you have said something on the book, but I would like to listen to you.
No, center-state issues are there in every federation. They're not unique to India. We saw them. They're in developed countries like US, Canada. They're in less developed countries like South Africa, Ethiopia, India, China, Indonesia. All federations have center-state issues. In fact, the East Timor separated from Indonesia maybe 10, 15 years ago because of center-state issues, because of a grievance that resources that were of East Timor were being, they did not have complete ownership or enjoyment of the resources. They had to give away part of the rest of the country. Even Europe, for example, is a federation, European Union, and there are problems there about Northern European states, countries like Germany and the Scandinavian countries having to support southern European countries like Greece and Italy and Portugal, etc. So these issues are common everywhere, and I don't think they will go away. The important thing is, do we have institutional arrangements that give us for resolving these issues amicably without too much of politics coming in? That's the important issue. And in India, we have institutional mechanism. It is only appropriate, I mean, it's okay, par for the course that states have grievances, but that's par for the course. If center-state friction gets so deep and to such an extent that militates against national objectives, then I think it would be a concern.
But do you think that we have institutional mechanism?
Pardon me?
Do you think that we have institutional mechanism to address these issues?
Oh yeah, we have the Finance Commission, which decides on the center-state issues. We have a mechanism for the central government deciding how much states should borrow and when they can borrow. We have the FRBM. So I'm not suggesting that these are foolproof. We're still having problems, and we should be able to resolve them even if the existing institutions are inadequate to resolve.
Okay. So, sir, you made a very interesting point in your book that center collects 60% of the tax revenues, while its pending liabilities are only 40%, and states vice versa, right? So, do you think there is a case for higher allocation from the tax, divisible tax pool for states? Like right now, it's 42%.
Yeah, 42%. You know, like I put those numbers in the book, if you take ballpark estimates between center and states of the total pool of taxes collected, the center collects 60%, states collect 40%. Of the total pool of expenditure, the center share is 40%, the state share is collective share of states is 60%. So what that shows is that about 20% of center taxation or it shifts from the center to states, which is okay because under the Constitution, taxation powers and expenditure responsibilities are given under the state list, central list, and the concurrent list. And there's an imbalance, and that imbalance is corrected, like you suggested, by the award of the Finance Commission, which determines what proportion of central taxes should be shared with the states and how those shares should be distributed among states, the vertical share and the horizontal share. Now, the vertical share has gradually gone up over the years. Now it is, as you said, 42%. States, of course, want more, but center has its own inability to give more. They have their concerns for defense expenditure, national security. So center always pleads its inability to give more, states want more. And to resolve this competing demands, we have the Finance Commission. My own view is that center is fiscally stretched, and I don't believe it can give very much more to states.
Okay. Sir, one thing that I found missing in your book is the mention of demonetization. You being the former RBI governor, you somehow did not say anything on demonetization. Why was that?
Yeah, I didn't say on demonetization because I had debited office by then. I left the RBI in 2013. Demonetization, I believe, happened in 2016. So it's not part of my story. So I didn't talk about it.
Okay. So, so you have touched upon a very interesting, a very controversial issue in India, that was CAG scam, telecom scam, right? And somehow you have given a benefit of doubt to the government. Do you think that there was no scam as such in 2G spectrum allocation?
No, whether there was a scam or not is not for me to decide. I believe it is being inquired by a court, and we should leave it to the court decision. What I said was that there were two issues in that 2G case. One was the price at which 2G spectrum must be given in 2007-8. The second was the process of selecting licenses, the auction process or the bidding process. The bidding process was done entirely by the Department of Telecom. I had nothing to do with the finance ministry, had nothing to do with it. And what is under criminal investigation is some alleged irregularities or illegality in giving away licenses. That's not part of my story. My story was about the price at which 2G spectrum was sought to be given in 2007-8. In particular, the view at that time of the Department of Telecom was that we should give 2G spectrum in 2007-8 at the price discovered in 2001 through an auction. As Finance Secretary, I took the view that we must rediscover the price through a fresh auction, because in the intervening period between 2001 and 2007-8, the world and in India, we realized that spectrum is a scarcer commodity than we earlier believed, and that part of the scarcity premium must accrue to the government. That's the reason I asked for a price rediscovery through a fresh auction. So I think we should not conflate the two issues.
Okay. Okay. So, sir, again, you said in your book that for developed economies, they can shun fiscal austerity, while emerging countries cannot. So, what
Pardon me,
are
I
you?
didn't get you. Sorry, can you please repeat?
So, in your book, you've said that developed economies can, for some time, shun fiscal austerity and go for a little bit of fiscal profligacy, but in emerging countries like India should not.
Yes.
So, do you think? Are you happy with the current government performance on this front?
Well, back in 2021 or sometime, I wrote openly in an op-ed that the finance minister has chosen a fiscal consolidation path for a longer time adjustment and for an end target that was still above the target set by the FRBM. The target set by the FRBM is 3% of GDP for the central government, but the finance minister said that she'll bring it to 4.5% by 24-25, right? So at that time, I said it's a more relaxed fiscal consolidation. But over the last 4 years, I believe the central government has been very responsible in fiscal management. And the finance minister has reiterated that she'll be able to deliver on that target. We have to see after the election which government comes into office and who becomes the finance minister. But I hope whoever comes into office will adhere to that target. And then after having met the target in 24-25, is it 24-25 or 25-26?
I think 25-26.
I think it's 25-26.
26, yeah.
25-26. Fiscal 26 to 25-26. So whichever government comes into office after the election should adhere to the target, and having met that target by 25-26 should go beyond and indicate a roadmap for reaching the FRBM target of 3% of GDP.
Okay. Do you think our current debt levels are sustainable at 82% overall?
No, I have my concerns about the current debt levels being sustainable. No, the debt to GDP ratio went as high as 90% during COVID, quite understandable. And it's since come down. It is at 80%, that is the total government sector debt, center and states put together. The FRBM committee said that an appropriate, a sustainable target for India is 60%, 40% for the center and 20% for the states collectively. We could probably review that target, but I don't think I don't think there's a possibility that we can afford to have a much higher debt to GDP ratio. The reason being that interest payments are already very high for the center and state. Interest payments on the accumulated stock of debt is the largest item of expenditure, largest single item of expenditure for the center and states. And it is also the fastest growing item of expenditure. So if interest payments are, if fiscal deficit is not controlled, interest payments due will go up even further, and they will preempt other expenditures. So I believe there's a case for bringing the debt to GDP ratio down.
To 60%, or do you think the 70? When you say
Well, the FRBM committee said 60%. I have not, looked at the numbers. The formula is there that for debt to be sustainable, a country should have a primary surplus, and its growth rate must be higher than the average interest rate of the stock of debt. We fulfill the second condition. Our growth rate has typically been higher than the average interest rate of the debt. But the other condition about primary surplus we don't meet. And even the interest rate being lower than the growth rate is partly because of what economists call financial depression, which is the large SLR requirement.
Okay. So again, you're saying in your book that our growth prospect and our debt, and hence our debt sustainability, depend critically on private investment pouring in. Do you think private investment is playing out well in India?
Is private investment what?
Is private investment happening in India right now? Do you think, are you satisfied with it?
No, the numbers show that private investment is not picked up yet. Someone told me, I'm not sure, but even the finance minister, when asked that question some week ago, she said, why is Hanuman not flying? Okay. So I see only the numbers, and the numbers show that private investment has not yet picked up. The economy is, of course, clocking high growth rates, but that economy is running on one engine, the engine of public investment. And public investment at this level cannot be sustained because we have fiscal constraints. So to maintain this growth momentum, the economy has to fire on all cylinders: consumption, private investment, government investment, and net exports. So private investment is a very important component of our growth story, and it must pick up. Why, over the last 10 years, of course, we've had this twin balance sheet problem that's since been resolved happily. And I believe both the corporates and banks are now in good enough health to take private investment forward. Capacity utilization is also coming to saturation levels. It's close to 80%. That's the level at which private investors think of adding to investment capacity. And I think private investment is partly inhibited by export demand, which is not very robust at the moment. But I think also that most corporates are waiting for elections to be over so that they can go on with elections is an episode, but they just want that to be behind us so that they can make long-term plans.
Okay. Sir, on growth versus inflation. Okay, so before I ask that question, I just want to ask you another question. Do you think cost of capital, or why do you think private investment not picking up? Do you think it's the cost of capital which is very high, and what do Indians do to address this issue?
Well, the cost of capital is high because cost of savings is high, right?
Okay.
So, for people to invest, they need savings. And because cost of savings is high, cost of loans is high. And that's something we have to, cost of debt or loans can come down either if the savings rate can come down, or if banks improve their efficiency by way of net interest margin. And we must work on both of them.
Okay. On the inflation,
I mean, cost of capital is high because capital is a scarce commodity in our country.
Yeah. Okay. So, sir, on inflation, I mean, how do you rate this government's performance in terms of keeping the inflation below 5%?
It'll be impolitic for me to comment on the
Okay.
government or RBI's performance, so we leave that question. But I think RBI has done a commendable job in managing inflation during a difficult time.
Okay. Okay. Sir, a lot of pride is attached to the value of rupee. There is this thing that, weaker rupee is a sign of weaker country. How do you dispel this myth?
I don't know how to dispel it, but I think you're right that governments, even a large public, tend to believe that a stronger rupee is a sign of economic resilience and economic strength and economic growth, and a weaker rupee is a sign of economic vulnerability. I don't think we should see it that way. In fact, we should see exchange rate movement as part of the process of market adjustment. As India is globalizing, our exchange rate will move up and down depending on our domestic conditions as well as external conditions. And we must get used to the fact that the rupee will move both ways. We should get worried if the rupee moves only in one direction, if it is rapidly deteriorating or rapidly appreciating. But if it's moving both ways, I think we should allow it to move, because if first, as I said, we should not see a strong rupee as strength and a weak rupee as weakness, because a weak rupee, or I would say a lower rupee, also helps exports, right? So we should not see that strong rupee as strength. And then I think there's a case for the RBI becoming less interventionist and allowing the rupee to move according to market forces, because if RBI intervenes every time there is a move, or if market believes that RBI will intervene, there is a risk that market participants will outsource the risk management to the RBI. There's a moral hazard. So I don't think, there is RBI should, of course, act consistent with its policy of not targeting any exchange rate and intervening in the market only to manage volatility, and should be less hands-off, less interventionist, in order for the rupee to get internationalized, which is what the Prime Minister urged the Reserve Bank at its 90th birthday celebrations on the 1st of April.
So, sir, how do you think our rupee can be an international currency like the way we are hoping?
Well, it can be in theory. In practice, it's quite far. Today, first of all, what do we want? What do we mean by internationalization? We want rupee to be used for invoicing trade and for settlement of trade, right? And the Chinese experience will be very useful to us. China, like India, like us, wanted to internationalize the RMB. And over the last 10, 15 years, China has been successful to some extent. Today, a significant chunk of Chinese trade is invoiced in the RMB, is settled in the RMB. But China has also a large global footprint. It is the largest trading nation in the world. So China has been able to internationalize the RMB as a unit of account, as a medium of exchange, but not yet as a store of value, because China still has capital controls, and Chinese institutions of governance do not command credibility. So what do we learn from the Chinese experience if we want to internationalize the rupee? First, we must expand our global footprint in trade. We must expand and diversify our imports and exports as a proportion of global GDP and diversify destinations. Second, we must relax capital controls, albeit gradually. Our fiscal must become more robust. Our financial sector must become more resilient. And our institutions of governance must command more credibility. Then rupee will become more internationally acceptable.
Okay, sir. Thanks for your time, and thanks for this wonderful conversation.